I got to give Cleveland some credit. I urged them to spend some money and to go for it, and they did, and looks like they are.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. You can follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever they're calling it these days, and on Instagram. I'm on Instagram at, easy for you to say, at Sully Baseball Podcast, but the best way to get a hold of me is right here on the YouTube page. Let's go through the trivia question, or should I say trivia questions, and I'll explain what I mean by that. We were talking about trades in a earlier episode where I talked about big trades that were disastrous for certain teams, and I put the Mookie Betts deal along with the Mike Piazza deal, the Babe Ruth deal, and the Tom Seaver deal as four unique deals where they were made basically out of spite and not out of being trying to make the best decision for the team. And I asked the question, who is the only major leaguer to be traded for Greg Maddux? And the answer was done by Big John 08865. Cesar Asturis was traded by the Cubs. To the Braves for Greg Maddux. Not 100% correct there, Big John, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. It was a deal between the Cubs and the Dodgers, not the Braves. The Braves never traded Greg Maddux, but you are correct that it was Cesar Asturis who was dealt in the deal that was between the Chicago Cubs and the LA Dodgers. Lest we forget, Maddux played with the Dodgers a couple of times, and he's one of the people who a group of Hall of Famers who finished their career with the Dodgers, and some of them, the names on that list are unexpected, like Juan Marichal and Ricky Henderson. Later, when he was on the Padres, Greg Maddux was on the Padres. He was traded from the Padres to the Dodgers down the stretch. Eduardo Perez and Mike Watt were the two players who were sent from LA to San Diego, but neither one of them made it to the major league. So that's why I said, made it clear I was talking about a major leaguer dealt for Greg Maddux. But something interesting here, and I got to bring this up. Joe Sahagun said, did I miss it? Did you forget to answer the trivia question from last episode? Yes. Yes, I totally did. I've been wanting to do that trade episode. I set up that I was going to answer the trivia question, and I forgot to do it. And the question that I asked was, what are the three teams who have never had an MVP? And that a couple of you guessed. John Murphy Jr. here said the Mets, the Marlins, and I think the Rockies. Well, you got one of them right. The Mets are one of them, but the Marlins had Giancarlo Stanton win the MVP, and the Rockies had Larry Walker win the MVP. So that is incorrect. Ed Minty got it correct. The Diamondbacks, Mets, and Rays are the teams that have never had a most valuable player. I would argue that Mike Piazza probably should have won at least one MVP, but what do I know? A few weeks ago, I did an episode, and I would talk a lot about the Cleveland Guardians not spending money, and I took them to task for it because they have wealthy owners, and they are a team that has a legitimate chance to go to the World Series. Every team not called the Chicago White Sox has a shot to make the playoffs. And the Cleveland Guardians got to not only within 3 wins of the World Series last year, but they lost 2 very close games in games 4 and 5, including an extra. They had a chance to win both of those games, at least one of them. and sending it back to New York for Game 6. You roll the dice at that point. And seeing that Cleveland has had the longest World Series drought of any fan base, including Milwaukee. But Milwaukee has had a more recent World Series championship with the 57 Braves. And the fact that the Guardians are consistently in the bottom 10, if not the bottom 5 of payroll, when they could win a very, very winnable division if they just spent a little more dough. And as I said, I'm not talking spending Dodger money or Yankee money or Met money, or even Cub money. I mean, I'm talking about spending Diamondback money. Spend enough to be in the middle. And I took them to task for it. Of course, Mr. Dolan, the owner, died almost exactly afterwards. And I felt badly that I was kind of trashing ownership. And then I look up and he passed away. But they did two things today that I thought really were smart. One thing was they extended Tanner Bibee, and that is how you pronounce his name. And Tanner Bibee, like me, is a graduate of Cal State Fullerton. Go Titans, Tanner Bibee. And he is going to make more money than me as a Titan graduate. He got signed to a 5-year extension, and which is essentially going to buy out one of his free agent years. But they signed him. They know that for the next bunch of years he's there, and they don't have to worry about him. And he's going to make 4 million next year, 7 million. It goes up 10 million, 21 million, and then there's a club option for 2030 with a $1 million buyout. I like this move. I like moves where you're basically saying, all right, we don't have to worry about this guy for a little bit. Now, he pitched very, very well in his rookie year in 2023. He was the runner-up of the Rookie of the Year uh, behind Gunnar Henderson. Tough to argue with Gunnar. Gunnar Henderson had a phenomenal rookie year, but Tanner Bibee had a solid year, and he did not have a sophomore slump. He had a good year last year. Pitched 173 and two-thirds innings, had a good ERA, had a very good strikeout to innings pitch, excellent strikeout to walk ratio, and was solid. He pitched pretty well in the postseason against the Tigers. He didn't pitch so well against the Yankees. Oddly, 2 starts, 8 and 2/3 innings total in the division series. So obviously, he's not pitching like a workhorse in the playoffs. But I like this move because it also sends a message to the rest of the team. All right, we know Tanner Bibee is going to be here. We know Jose Ramirez is going to be here. We know that they have control over their bullpen. It sends a message to the fans as well. They are going to go for it in the next couple of years in a very winnable American League Central. Now, I am picking the Detroit Tigers because I love their offseason. I think they did something pretty good. However, I think this is a smart move to at least send the message that, all right, we're going to spend a little cash. Now, the other thing they did is they traded away Tyler Freeman, who is kind of a jack of all trades. He's an infielder, he's an outfielder, does a little bit of this, does a little bit of that, has a little bit of speed, a little bit of power, but it's mainly his versatility is his biggest asset. And they flipped him to the Colorado Rockies. And friend of the podcast, Thomas Harding. Thomas Harding's been on the show and on Locked On Rockies when I guest hosted there. Good friend of the show. He announced that they was traded for Nolan Jones. And let me just say, I love this move. Now, it's not a bad move for the Rocks. They got a guy who could play a whole bunch of different positions. It's not bad. But Nolan Jones had a very good rookie year. Hit 20 home runs, had an OPS of 931. Granted, it's at Coors Field. But, he had a very good rookie year. Was a 2020 player. Last year, not so good. Last year, most of his numbers plummeted, and he had some back injuries and everything like that. I think he's a good player. He's only 27 years old, and he has power, he has speed. He can play, each of the outfield positions, and I think he could give if he, granted, no hitters park is like Coors on the planet, but if his back is in better shape, we saw that he is someone with power and speed. Maybe he strikes out too much. Everybody strikes out too much. And maybe his numbers may have been a touch inflated because he plays in Coors Field, and I hit 4 home runs in Coors Field last year. But I'm going to take a look at his splits. I'm going to baseballreference.com, the single greatest website in the history of the planet Earth. And his home and away splits when he had a very good year in 2023, he had an OPS of 928 at home at Coors and an OPS of 935 on the road. That's right. His OPS was higher away from Coors Field than it was in Coors. And they're getting him in a bounce back year in exchange for a player who is fine and versatile. But I think if he is going to come back from his back injury and plays the way he could and he showed he could in Coors Field, I think this is a dynamite move for Cleveland. So, do you know what? Good for the Cleveland Guardians. Cleveland fans have been waiting for a long time. They didn't even get a World Series championship in the Major League movies. So, good for them. This is the right kind of move. This is an aggressive move. And it's a move that's saying to the fan base, hey, sure, we can win this. It's winnable. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the reactions to the trade episode. And oh, did I? I did answer the two. Yes, I sat here going, wait a minute. I made a big deal of saying that we didn't have the trivia question answer the other day, and I just had to stop and ask myself, did we answer it? I think we did, didn't we? Yeah, we talked about the MVP. Okay, I'm losing my mind. All right, we come back. We're going to talk about the trade episode. When it comes to fueling your body, quality matters. That's why Just Ingredients is changing the game with clean, high quality products designed to support better health and peak performance. Look at this. This is the strawberry limeade one that I got. This is a pre workout before you exercise. And it gives you, there's nothing artificial in this. And it contains amino acids. It's non GMO. And it's vegan for those of you who do the vegan thing. Now, look at Just Ingredients offers an NSF certified line of protein powder, electrolytes, pre-workout creatine. This is the pre-workout one, all rigorously tested to ensure they're free from substances banned by major athletic organizations. Just Ingredients is also partnered with two-time MVP Bryce Harper, who trusts their NSF certified sports line to fuel his training and recovery. Come on, if it's good enough for Bryce Harper, it's good enough for you. And this is real ingredients. This is not a bunch of just unnatural junk you're putting in. That's why there's just the good ingredients here. And I love the taste. The strawberry limeade, it's not just that's something you take before a workout and you're like, yikes. No, it tastes great. And it gives you the pre-workout you need. And there's also the protein powder and so many other different products. Whether you're recovering after a workout or you need energy boost, they're grass-fed, whey protein and pre-workout. It delivers real results. So visit justingredients.us and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for 20% off. And for more wellness tips, follow Just Ingredients on Instagram. Just Ingredients. I like this one. I did have a last line on that one. Hey, let's go through some of the reactions to the trades. And I have to say, when I was talking about bad trades, I really wanted to isolate those four. That the Seaver trade, the sale of Babe Ruth, the Piazza trade, and the Mookie Betts trades were successful, wealthy organizations making moves to make their team worse, and basically were inexcusable then. I really try to avoid trades that, and I brought up a bunch of other trades that were really bad, but you could see squinting, they thought they were doing something right. They thought that maybe they were doing something correct. And I also want to avoid the teams that were just dumping players in a salary dump. Now I got a couple other people who's wrote some things in. Cameron Coy 2874 said the Cubs trade of Lou Brock to the Cardinals. The Marlins traded Miguel Cabrera, the Randy Johnson. Well, I mentioned the Randy Johnson Mark Langston trade because I think that was a trade that when it was made, it looked like the Expos were doing it, did something terrific. They acquired one of the legit aces in baseball, and they were going for it. And Randy Johnson wasn't looked upon as a potential Hall of Fame prospect. It just didn't work out. It was highly praised when the deal made. I have a hard time putting the Miguel Cabrera trade in there for two reasons. First of all, that was a salary dump. The Marlins, I think the Marlins are a Mickey Mouse organization. They always have been. But they were not going to sign Cabrera to a long term deal. And I think that when you take a look at that trade, they thought they were getting a couple of good pieces in that. Lest we forget that, yes, and the trade turned out to be a disaster for the Marlins. And the Tigers got a Hall of Famer because he arrived in Detroit just as Mr. Ilitch was handing out contracts and wanted the Tigers to be big spenders. They was traded along with Dontrelle Willis on his contract. Burke Badenhop, Frankie De La Cruz, Mike Ribello, fine. But Cameron Maybin was looked upon as a top uh, outfield prospect, and Andrew Miller was looked upon as an elite pitching prospect. So they really thought they were getting a bunch of players. They thought they were getting some depth, but they thought they may be getting an ace in Miller and a solid outfielder in Maybin. So I don't look at and eventually Miller became an all-star caliber pitcher just as a reliever, and wound up doing so with the Yankees and with Cleveland when they got to within one swing of winning the World Series. It turned out to be a disaster, but I'm not willing to throw that in the same boat. Also, because I think it was clear that the Marlins were not going to pay for it. Now, whether or not you want to talk about the Marlins being a Mickey Mouse organization and not signing this elite talent, I'll listen to that. But I'm not willing to put it in that situation because I think they thought they were getting a lot of talent back for him. Now, the Lou Brock trade is famously known as being a terrible deal because, once again, anytime you trade someone away and you're getting someone who was, turns out to be a Hall of Famer, that's bad news. But here's the reason why I won't put that in that situation yet. Yes, the Cubbies should have kept Lou Brock. They did have a lot of talent on that team. And Ernie Brolio, who was the main player that the Cubs got in exchange for Lou Brock, was a really good pitcher. He finished third in the Cy Young Award vote in 1960. In 1963, he was still someone who pitched 250 innings. You had a 2.99 ERA. And back then, they really leaned on wins and losses. He was 18-8, and he was pitching for he was doing all that with the Cardinals. And the Cubs thought they were getting a chance to get someone who was still in their 20s and coming off of an off year. He was having a bit of an off year in 1964, but a little change will do the right thing for him. And if they had Ernie Brolio in a rotation and a team that still had Billy Williams, that had Ernie Banks, that had Ron Santo, they had they had Hall of Fame hitters in the lineup. And so you add Brolio to a rotation that included, Larry Jackson and Dick Ellsworth. They thought they were getting a big pitcher to go in for that. So I'm not willing to throw it into the same category because Brock wasn't a Hall of Famer yet. It exploded in their face. Brolio was in the bullpen after a year. He was out of baseball after a couple more years, and Lou Brock went on to get 3,000 hits, set stolen base records, be a terrific World Series player, and make it to the Hall of Fame. So, yes, it didn't work out, but I don't think it's the same thing. I think the ones that really sabotage the team will do. Now, this one is interesting. Big Rob O'Morris said the Dodgers trade Pedro Martinez to the Montreal Expos for Delino DeShields. It's a much worse trade. It's hard to not mention that as an all-time terrible trade. And that's pretty close to being listed as a franchise killer. Imagine if the Dodgers had kept Pedro Martinez and Mike Piazza, that they would have had both of their primes in the 90s together at the same time. Um, at the time, remember, the Ramon Martinez was the stud. In 1991, Ramon Martinez was their big Cy Young contender, throwing no hitters, being on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And Pedro Martinez was the little brother in more ways than one. And Pedro was much smaller than Ramon, and there wasn't a lot of thought that he was going to be a superstar like his brother. And they needed infield depth. And they were using Pedro primarily out of the bullpen. Can you imagine Pedro coming out of the bullpen? But in 93, he pitched 65 games and only started two. Now, and he was being used that way. He was basically used as a setup man, and they didn't have faith that he was going to be a star like his brother. And Delino DeShields was an excellent second baseman for the Montreal Expos. He got some MVP votes in 1992, finished second in the Rookie of the Year in 1990, and had a high batting average, stole a lot of bases, and they thought, hey, we got a guy who's essentially a setup man, and we can get a 25-year-old second baseman stud. And to be fair to Delino DeShields, he had a nice career. Played for 13 years. Uh, had a couple of good, had a couple of years with the Dodgers. He actually had one or two very good years with the St. Louis Cardinals. Then bounced around a bit between the Cardinals and the Orioles and the Cubbies. But Pedro Martinez went on to be the greatest pitcher, at least one of the great pitchers of that era, along with Randy Johnson and the aforementioned Greg Maddux. Yes, that turned out to be a terrible trade, but Pedro wasn't the face of the franchise yet. And his trade from Montreal was a salary dump, so I can't include that. But yes, in terms of a disastrous trade, that turned out to be one. But I can't put it in the same category because he wasn't that great player yet. Now, um, Frederick Frederick Dean Frederick. I don't know how to pronounce your name. Frederick D. and Reuter 180 says Danny Cater for Sparky Lyle. Now, this was a truly terrible trade. I remember this is one of those moments when I was first starting to follow baseball, and in the late 1970s, and Sparky Lyle won the Cy Young Award, was one of the top relievers in baseball. And look at the back of his baseball card saying he was on the Red Sox. Yeah, he was, and he was a pretty good reliever with the Red Sox. He was on the '67 Impossible Dream Team with the Red Sox, and wound up saving 20 games in 1970. This was back when closers weren't the big stars yet, and he was kind of emerging as a top closer. And the Red Sox traded him. It was multiple players that traded, but it was mainly Lyle for Danny Cater. Now, Danny Cater was a kind of a in corner. He was basically a corner infielder with not a lot of pop. Had one very good year in Oakland in 1968, and had a couple pretty good years with the Yankees. I'm not 100% sure what the Red Sox were thinking. In 1972, the Red Sox did contend. They finished actually half a game out at first at the end of the year. But and Danny Cater was the everyday first baseman. But why? They really could have used another reliever. By the way, two of their their top reliever that year was Bill Lee, and their top saver were Bill Lee and Bobby Boylan, each with 5 saves. They really could have used some bullpen help. Sparky Lyle, if Sparky Lyle was on the 1972 team instead of Danny Cater, maybe that would have been the team that ended the curse. But again, Lyle, that's a truly terrible trade as well. And Useless Trucker brought up something here which I agree with. Not trading Ohtani for draft picks by the Angels was the worst decision ever. I don't know if it was for draft picks, but certainly they should have gotten something from. They basically let him walk, and they got nothing from. Not a thing. That's dumb. But thanks for the responses. We come back. There's a new segment that I'm going to do. I'm not sure if it's going to be daily, but it's certainly going to be something I'm going to do a lot, which are great players you probably haven't heard of. Hey, let's hear from our friends over at FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to get on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can bet $200 of bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories. Now, this has been an interesting couple of days here. We've seen Auburn get all the, Auburn's number one in their bracket. They've already made to the Sweet 16. Now, what is New Mexico going to do? That's right. New Mexico upset Marquette. Sorry, cousin Dave. And Michigan State is there. Are they going to be the next big team to fall? Will Florida take on UConn? Florida's a number one seed, but never bet against a team from UConn. And it looks more and more the which bracket is this here? The bracket that has Houston and Purdue and Tennessee, that looks like it's being pretty predictable up at this point. If Kentucky beats Illinois, the 1, 2, 3, and 4 seeds will all be in the Sweet 16. It makes sense, and it's a good time to head on over to FanDuel. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something to bet on, and the FanDuel app is simple and easy to use. When I win, I get paid instantly, no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoop action all tournament long. That's FanDuel. A couple of people write to me saying that they like the fact that I do my best to try to tie in the present to the past and the future with baseball. I love baseball history. That's one of the main reasons I follow baseball. And when I was out in the Hall of Fame last summer, you see a lot of plaques, and some of the players you just know. There's Reggie Jackson, there's Joe Morgan, there's Willie Mays, there's Jackie Robinson, there's Greg Maddux, I almost said Roger Clemens. There's not Roger Clemens. But then there are names you may not recognize. Great players and legends who have their plaques, but don't have your knowledge. And so I want to talk about a couple of these players, and maybe a couple of times a week, maybe 5 times, whatever I think about it. I'm going to bring up a player, a great player that chances are you don't know. And I'm going to bring up the man known as Judd Wilson. Ernest Judson Wilson, who was born in Remington, Virginia in 1894, became and served our country in World War I, became a mainstay in the Negro Leagues from 1923 to 1945. He was a tremendous hitter, sometimes batting over 400. And granted, the Negro Leagues had shorter schedules, and some of the scorekeeping is not as reliable as organized ball was at that point. But he had the reputation of getting big, huge hits and delivering big time. In fact, Satchel Paige called him one of the two. He and Chino Smith were the hardest outs he ever had. Now, he played from Baltimore, the Homestead Grays. He played on the great Pittsburgh Crawford team alongside Josh Gibson. Then he played for the Philadelphia Stars for a while before returning to the Homestead Grays. And he wound up being one of the best hitters in Negro League history. Led the league in hitting with a 373 average in 1923. He batted over 400 a couple of times. And he was called Bajum Wilson. That was his nickname, was Bajum Wilson, because he had tremendous power. He didn't have great home run power. He didn't have put up great home run numbers. His 160, if he played a 162 game season, his average would have been 14 homers, but he also would have had an OPS of 958. One thing he did is he piled up doubles. He piled up extra base hits and several times led the league in doubles. And Bojum was his nickname because supposedly that was the sound the ball made when it ricocheted off of the wall. He was kind of a short dude. He was 5'8", but he was a big dude. He was 190 pounds, left-handed power hitter with a bit of a nasty temperament. But he played in the Negro Leagues. He played in Cuba. He played everywhere, primarily a third baseman, also a first baseman. And he played up until the 1945, right around the time of integration. And when the league started to integrate, he was a little bit over the hill and was not going to get the job. He also was dealing with, I guess he was dealing with epilepsy at the time or some sort of seizure. And by the end of his career, he wasn't able to hit the same way. I'm going to read what his Hall of Fame plaque says. Ernest Judson Wilson, Judd Bajum, Negro Leagues, 1922-1945, a hard-nosed, fiery competitor who excelled in 3 decades as a first and third baseman with the Baltimore Black Sox, Homestead Grays, Philadelphia Stars, feared and respected batter who terrorized pitchers by hitting over 350 during his career, including several seasons over 400. Captain renowned 1931 Homestead Grays and played on 4 championship teams, named to 3 East-West All-Star teams, and starred in the Cuban Winter League. The East-West was the big event of the Negro Leagues. That was the All-Star game with all the legends playing, usually playing that game at Comiskey Park. Now, sadly, he did not get his due during his life, and he died in the early 60s. And his death was not really noted by Major League Baseball when it happened. He is buried in Arlington Cemetery because he served our country in World War II. But justice came for Judd Wilson as Bajum was selected to be in the Hall of Fame in the Negro League Committee vote of 2006. Would he have starred in the major leagues? It certainly sounded like he would have. He certainly started in the Negro Leagues and was a big name there and put up a big sound. You may not have heard of him, but you've heard of him now. Hall of Famer Judd Wilson. That player you probably haven't heard of, who we're saluting on this episode of Locked On MLB. Let's go to the trivia question right now. Now, the trivia question, here we go. Last year, Ezequiel Tovar of Colorado and Jared Duran of Boston led their respective leagues in doubles. Who was the last player to lead either league in doubles in back-to-back years? Who was the last person to lead the league in doubles in back-to-back years? Will it be Ezequiel Tovar and Jared Duran? We'll find out. But who was the last person to do it in back-to-back years? That is your trivia question. So follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever they're calling it these days. And on Instagram, I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. But the best way to get a hold of us is right here on YouTube. Talking about Cleveland spending money, trades that were bad, and Bajum Wilson being honored. This has been Locked On MLB. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.